Welcome to this first of a series of webinars about getting serious about food systems transformation. My name is Lennart Woltering. I'm a scaling expert at CIMMIT and GIZ, and I'm doing my PhD with the Wageningen University on the implications of food system transformation and how we should approach scaling of innovation. I also co-chair the agricultural working group of the International Community of Practice on Scaling. This community of practice has now about 4,000 members, donors, researchers, implementers, all passionate about scaling of development, scaling for sustainable development. You're all welcome to join at no charge by going to this website. And I think, Ryan, you're putting it in the chat now, right? The Scaling Community of Practice is co-hosting this webinar. And I'm very excited to moderate today's session. We have more than 300 people registered, so we are muting you. Sorry for that. Normally, we'd like to have some more interaction, but we have so many people. We mute you and ask you to post your questions in the chat or in the Q&A window. 2 years ago, we had Danielle Resnick of GIZ in one of our Scaling Community of Practice sessions, and he said, transformative change is called for when existing systems, paradigms, socio-technological regimes appear fundamentally incapable of enabling sustainable development or are the cause of the problems. And that stuck with me. And I think it comes back a lot in discussions about targets for climate change or reaching the sustainable development goals. They will not be reached if we just do better what we're doing now. But you may have also noticed the sarcastic tone in the title of the webinar. Most organizations have barred out the word agriculture and development and replaced them with food systems and with transformation. Also in the CGIAR, I think it's great that the two important initiatives in the CGIAR on nature-positive solutions and low-emission food systems came together for this webinar series to shed light on how different business actually should be. We put CGIAR in the title, but the discussions will certainly be relevant far beyond the CGIAR. We kick off today with a deeper understanding of what a food system is and if we can actually transform it. So I'm very proud to introduce Lou Verchot. He is the research leader for the Alliance Biodiversity and CIAT, lead of CGIAR's initiative on low-emission food systems, Mitigate Plus for Friends, and he will share the opening remarks. Lou, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Leonard. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to see the folks online that have come out for this. This morning, I was reading a paper by Morgan et al. In the Royal Society Open Science Journal, and they were talking about the need to reconnect science with the creative aspect of what science is all about. And they noted that the significant challenges we face globally are shaped by conditions of volatility, of uncertainty, of complexity, ambiguity. And the challenges often arise from different views of what science is and what it is for and how it can contribute to addressing these and providing direction for policymakers and other stakeholders to tackle some of these issues. And there's a general feeling that holistic approaches are critical to identifying and anticipating these challenges. And one second. Something's happening with my computer. So a sense that to address these challenges really need much more holistic approaches to make breakthroughs and find solutions to address some of these challenges. But to achieve this, there's also the need to address how science is within these contexts and how it's going to interact with society and address some of the problems. And in order to do this, science needs to rediscover its creative roots. The risk is that science will become a tool to address technical issues and to respond to technical issues and miss opportunities for large breakthroughs. And these technical questions are important and need to be addressed and taken seriously because they are foundational. At the same time, there's a need to identify solutions that can emerge from reframing existing approaches, understanding of a system, and for synthesis that can occur at the intersection of disciplines. keeps disappearing from my screen, apparently. So recognize that science is a social enterprise, and it cannot be separated from the scientists who carry out these investigations, both with and for society. We need to maintain and grow the creativity of our scientific programs, and the scientists need to have space and be encouraged and be able to be creative. And this is important in applied fields as well as it is in pure science field. So to address complex problems, we need multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary settings. These need to be created, but not just created, also sustained. So as scientists, we need to communicate the value of science and that it has creativity woven into its fabric. We need to demonstrate the necessity of creativity across the board as we collaborate across disciplines, and connecting the biophysical sciences with the social sciences, with engineering, but also beyond that, with arts, with the humanities, with industry, to generate solutions to the questions that are going to shape the future of our species and our economies and our planet. So it's in this spirit that we've come together in the CGIAR Low Emissions Food Systems and Nature Positive Solutions Initiatives to create a space for exploration of some of these ideas and exchanges of viewpoints on how science can address some of these early 21st century issues related to food systems. We start at the beginning with this webinar, wrestling with what it means, what we mean by a food systems, and how a systems approach to research can provide more effective support for societal change as we face challenges of growing populations, changing diets, increasing severe externalities of our food system, food, energy, and waste systems, and that put the peril of our future well-being, put our future well-being in peril. So I want to welcome everyone here and kick this off. I don't want to take too much time because I'd really like to hear from the speakers. We have, I think, a great program today. So I'll turn it back over to you, Leonard, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lou. Now we go to our first speaker, and that is Cees Leeuwis. He's a professor in the Knowledge, Technology and Innovation Group at Wageningen University, and that's also the reason why you need a Dutch moderator once every while to pronounce that name. And he will share his insights on socio-technical innovation and transformation. Cees, we tested your screen share. We're all set. If you can try to do it again, and then the floor is yours. Thanks, Cees. Looking good? Yes, excellent. Yes. Thank you.
Let's see. Okay. Thank you very much, Leonard, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really pleased to speak for this audience. As mentioned, I'll talk a bit about what food systems are and how they change or do not change, and what this means for the CGIAR. And I think the reason probably why I was invited is that we published a paper about this. So my presentation is loosely based on that paper, which is also co-authored by the CG. And in that paper, we talk about in the right corner here, you see the multi-level perspective on system transformation. I will loosely touch on that, but not explain it in any detail. So what I will do is I'll talk a little bit about, trying to clarify food systems thinking with the, what do we know about system transformation? What is the role of research in transformation? So, what is this to the CG? And maybe between brackets, because I will not address it, but it's maybe for the discussion, how serious does or can the CG take systems thinking? There's a long history of systems thinking. The CG talked about farming systems, agricultural systems, aquatic systems, innovation systems, socio-ecological systems, seed systems, and it's not always been easy to take a systems approach with the CG. So there's in the corner here, on the bottom, you see some work we did on one of the systems programs that was forced to close not so long ago. So this is a representation of a food system. And there's more, the details are not important, right? So it just talks about drivers and environments and value chains and consumers and availability, access, utilization. Here's another representation from Wageningen University, actually, which talks about activities, drivers, environmental, socioeconomic, and it talks about outcomes. Here's yet another representation of a food system. So it's already clear that people do not exactly think the same when they talk about food systems. But the images tell us in any case that we're dealing with complex wholes, interacting entities, actors, activities, tasks, organizations, technologies, drivers, regulations, policies, agroecologies, environments, etc. And we use systems thinking to perform something, right? We are doing it for a reason. We think in terms of systems. Maybe we try to make things more tangible, or we suggest that we can control these systems, or the CG uses it to organize itself. They have an initiative about food system transformation, or are we attracting attention to donors? So I think there's also kind of a performative element to using the term food system transformation. But let's go back to more, what is systems thinking? What was it all about? So it's about interactions in complex wholes with all these different elements resulting in emergent properties. So that's quite fundamental to a system, that it has properties that none of the parts has. So the whole is more than the sum of the parts. You have parts of a car, and it's only when you put the car parts together in a particular way that the car can drive from A to B. So our systems, our food systems, have outcomes which are emergent, and some of those outcomes we find desirable and others we find undesirable. For example, pollution, climate change, and poverty. And then we talk about dysergy instead of synergies. And interestingly, in ARFD and the CGIAR, we tend to emphasize actually the problematic outcomes, poverty, climate change, obesity, inequity, and we do that for a reason. We're somehow want to be part of the solution to these kinds of. This is again this performative element here. So these outcomes, it's not as simple as a car, right? A car can be engineered, but in food systems, which are combined social and biomaterial systems, the linkages are not, they're much more fuzzy. So here you see an image that tries to conceptualize how is the social world in a food system connected to biomaterial, what has to do with institutions and rules and intentionalities and the way we interpret things and our knowledge and experiences, technology. And there's a whole web of these kinds of interactions taking place. And the emergent properties, they often arise basically as the unintended consequence of many intentional actions, right? We're not trying to engineer poverty, or we're not trying to engineer obesity, or we're not trying to engineer climate change. I mean, it's a logical consequences of how the system works, but it's not what we're trying to achieve necessarily. One of the problems with trying to change systems is that these actors, the idea of systems is our idea, right? It's the actors in the system, they don't consider the same system. Even scientists, when looking at it, they could see different parts of the system. They hardly anybody sees the whole, and that is true for scientists, and that's also true for for farmers and processors and consumers. They have completely different orientations and realities at hand, and they may have different goals, or they might pursue different outcomes than we might consider when looking at it from the CG perspective. So this is one complication. There are other complications of when you try to change a system, right? So the goals, the views of the system are different, but also the goals and the interests. There are multiple levels and silos and spheres. There are a lot of diversity. There's formal and informal and very different value chains and countries and contexts. Existing systems are resilient, right? So there's a certain systemic stability here. So it's not easy to change. There will be resistance. So there's no actor is in control of the system. So you cannot actually engineer a system, right? So we're talking about complex systems where there is high levels of disagreement, also quite considerable uncertainty and stability of the system, which makes it very difficult to try and change a system, at least in a kind of an intentional way, because on the other hand, of course, systems are in continuous flux and change. There's also different, there's different kinds of systems thinking. So there's a lot of literature in the systems world, and I simplify it here on this slide. There's, the engineering view is that you look at systems as if they were a machine, right? Like a car that you can engineer. But you can only do that when the goals are clear and when there's a lot of certainty and when you can change. And there's other views of systems, like systems are basically systems of thinking, and the way to change a system is about dialogue and learning and agreement. I'm not going to go deep into this. I think we're dealing with complex systems, and then it is probably more effective to look at systems from the perspective of an arena of struggle that is, where rules and regulations and institutions play an important role that partly change in unpredictable manners. And historians have actually done quite a bit of research on, how did transformations happen in the past, and this figure kind of symbolizes that, that on the one hand, it's about breaking down an existing system. If you want to transform, radical change of the system, you need to think about destabilizing the system, breaking it down, phasing out the existing systems that have emergent properties that you don't like, and you need to think about how to experiment with new ways, how to institutionalize them and stabilize them. And in the meantime, there will be quite a bit of chaos. And if you, it is critically, if we're thinking about system change in food systems, the changing the rules of the game, or changing the formal and informal rules that guide interaction, so institutions, or maybe even changing the game itself from football into something else. So it's quite difficult. There are important drivers such as international trade regulations, pricing systems, finance mechanisms, that probably will need to change if we really want to fundamentally alter the outcomes of food systems, right? We need different pricing systems. We need responsible finance instead of the current ways of finance. We need to perhaps redistribute the risks and the revenues in the value chain. We need to maybe rearrange funding mechanisms for service delivery, have different roles for states. So it's quite a difficult game. So if you look at historical research, then successful transformation requires pressure on the system, right? So existing systems need to experience somehow pressure, because otherwise the actors in the system are not really sort of open to change. You need a redundancy of options, both technical options and institutional options that are actually tried out in society, right? Not in science only, but in society. You need enough variation in a system to be able to find alternatives paths. So experimentation with new options and interventions at multiple levels is really critical. You need learning in society, actually, to make these options more mature and competitive. For example, if we now look at our alternative energy systems, we see all sorts of different options with energy, hydrogen, solar, wind, and these options need to become more mature, and learning and experimentation in society is critical. And in the end, it is all about coalition formation. It is about developing coalitions for change, political coalitions, discursive coalitions around these novel options. And interestingly, research can be a vehicle for this. So if you think about the role of research in system transformation, then I think we need to think about research in the context of, improving pressure on the sea or enhancing pressure, experimenting with options in society to foster learning and to contribute to this coalition formation processes. So to close, so I think it is important to consider that research is actually part of the food system. It's part of the problem and also part of the solution. So research may strengthen or weaken existing food systems. And I need to turn down my phone. Having transformative ambitions is actually deeply political, but also not having transformative ambitions is equally political, so because then you're reinforcing the existing food system. And I think, to put it maybe a bit more radical, I think if you take systems transformation seriously, then I think the process of doing research is actually at least as important as the findings, because it's the process of collaborative research, placing research in transformation rather than doing research for transformation, that actually helps society to come to grips and to mobilize these coalitions that we need to make to transform systems. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Cees. Really, really fantastic. And I really liked how you talked about systems and having their own behaviors. So I think when we talk about transformation, it's really important that we understand this behavior and that we use systems thinking to kind of understand that. You also mentioned the important role of people and stakeholders in food systems. And I'm really happy that we can now move on to the next speaker, Danielle Resnick. She's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, and she will share her insights on what does a food systems view mean for her, the implications on the political economy, and the implications for the CGIAR at large. Danielle, over to you. Your screen is well shared. Yes, thank you. Great. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lennart, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this really important webinar today. And really happy to follow Cass's intervention, because I think there's a lot of synergies and complementarities with what he just presented. And so I'll be also talking about this concept of a food system, what are the benefits and challenges of it, and what it also means for the CGIAR. So I think Cass has already presented a number of different diagrams on the food system, and so I'm just kind of adding to the basket of different diagrams that we've seen out there to kind of highlight how, exactly as Cass was saying, we're not fully, even within the development and research community, on the same page with what we mean by this concept. We have on the left, we have the FAO's food system wheel. And here they're quite specific. I mean, their ultimate goal is what you see in the center circle. They want to have poverty reduction, food security, and nutrition. And they're largely taking a kind of value chain approach to that. You can see they're talking about, producers, aggregators, processing, consumption. And then they talk about the range of different, factors, societal elements, as they call them, and natural elements that interact to get to that ultimate goal of poverty reduction and food security and nutrition. Now, the World Bank also has its own Food Systems to 2030 initiative, and you can see they've kind of layered a pyramid on top of the circle. And in this pyramid, they have a broader set of goals that they're trying to achieve. They certainly want to, raise incomes of the poor, but they've also put in the element of addressing healthy planet, making sure that we have food systems that give a positive environmental footprint and net negative emissions. And of course, having healthy people, affordable, safe, and nutritious food. And they're taking a much broader, set of interventions in their different outlying circles to get to those goals. They have these 5 I's: incentives, institutions, investments, information, innovation. So a bit broader than some of the more specific elements that you see in the food system wheel. And then on the right-hand side, you have the Food System Transformation Framework that was presented by the Food System Economic Commission. This group is actually launching their new report at the end of this month, But this diagram comes from their 2021 Nature Food publication. And here they're trying to even take us further, thinking about the importance of time and different types of even, linear interactions that we need to be thinking about to get transformation over time. They have a little bit more specificity as well in terms of policies that we can be thinking about to get to transformation, greenhouse gas taxes, biodiversity subsidies, food safety regulations. And for a political economist such as myself, it's welcoming to see that they're also thinking about the political economy of policy implementation. So they're taking an even a more kind of comprehensive view than we see in the other two diagrams. But the broad takeaway is that, all of these initiatives and institutes are seeing food systems as complex, interconnected, and dynamic. And I think the advantage of, this perspective is fourfold. I think first, it very much reflects the lived experience of many of us as individuals, as households, as communities. We know that food systems are very complex, they're very interconnected, with different dimensions of our daily lives. I think secondly, the food systems perspectives gets us off the farm. We're now looking at the rural to urban continuum through a food systems lens, and that gives us multiple entry points for policy change. And it gives us a broader set of partners to engage with. You think about some of the initiatives we've seen in cities and how we can be partnering with progressive mayors, even when we see a lot of policy inertia at the national level. Third, the food systems lens really, as Cass was alluding to, it can really facilitate coalition building. And this is really important when you're trying to overcome political economy obstacles, because you can have different types of advocacy groups that wouldn't maybe normally come together. They can use the food systems lens to create kind of a wider repertoire of framings to appeal to policymakers. So you can think about nutrition advocacy groups and environmental advocacy groups that may come together using this frame than they wouldn't normally otherwise do. And I think fourth, the food systems frame is increasingly giving attention to processes as well as outcomes. We may be interested in diets and environment and livelihoods, but it's not just about getting to those outcomes, it's how we get to those outcomes. And thinking about, having legitimate attention to governance factors. The diagram on the bottom right-hand side of your screen is coming from the Food Systems Countdown Initiative. This is led by Gain, Cornell, Columbia, Johns Hopkins University, and FAO. And I've had the pleasure to work with their governance group. And here we're really pushing the cross-cutting nature of governance in the food system. And we need to have a shared vision of what we're trying to get at in order to have buy-in, broad citizen buy-in to the vision. We need to have effective implementation, and that means sufficient public sector capacity to implement these types of food system transformation initiatives. And we need to have mechanisms of accountability for both the public and private sector to ensure that they actually do what they say they're going to do. On the other hand, there's quite a number of challenges of this food system lens, and we highlight a few of these in a new book that's come out just 2 months ago on the political economy of food systems transformation. We actually chose this cover more than a year ago. Interestingly, if you were reading the news over the past few days, you would see the same image of protesting farmers in Germany coming through the Brandenburg Gate, protesting against some of the initiatives coming through the EU farm to fork strategy. And I think the book kind of highlights the broader challenge with food systems, and that it's really expanded the range of interest groups that we need to be thinking about to get to food systems reforms. We're not just talking about producers and consumers anymore. We're talking about banks, insurance companies. We have mining conglomerates involved in the fertilizer sector. So we have a whole range of actors who, may be winners or losers from transformation reforms. And it becomes a little bit more challenging to think ex ante who we need to get on our side in order to make transformation initiatives successful. In addition, we've placed a broader range of kind of societal demands on our food systems. We're not just expecting our food systems to give us adequate nutrients anymore. We're seeing food systems as really a lens for a variety of power struggles. We want it to advance racial justice, gender equality, food sovereignty, and human rights. We're in the 20th anniversary of the voluntary guidelines on the right to food and making sure that food systems are supporting human rights. And then there's a lot of ambiguity over territorial externalities of different nation states' food systems policies. And this is clearly highlighted with some of the polarization that we're seeing around the European Union's farm to fork strategy. Even if you disregard the controversy that this has created across countries that are part of the EU, it's also putting, if fully implemented, puts a lot of pressure in terms of complying with a range of regulations and standards for developing countries. And South Africa in particular, there's been a lot of concern about what this would mean, particularly whether it would basically be so stringent that it would disadvantage some of the smaller scale and poorer farmers, essentially pushing them out of the food system and only kind of larger commercial farmers being able to comply with these new standards. On top of that, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges we face, is we don't really have a clear policy home when we talk about food systems. Very few countries, in fact, I can only think of a handful, have a food systems ministry. And when you look at the UN Food Systems Summit that we had in 2021, and you look at the range of submissions of national food systems pathways that were submitted, they're largely just an aggregation of sector-oriented strategies and policies. Governments talk about scaling up their multi-sectoral nutrition strategy or scaling up their agricultural industrial policies. But very few actually have a kind of comprehensive strategy to improve the food system as a whole. And I think part of this issue is that we've seen that the main counterpart for thinking about food systems is still the Ministry of Agriculture. This becomes very dramatically clear if you look at the histogram on the right-hand side. The conveners for the food systems dialogues and for subsequent implementation of food systems pathways has disproportionately been ministries of agriculture. Even though a food systems lens is supposed to provide a kind of broader perspective and would really kind of imply engaging with ministries of planning and finance, for instance, that can provide a more kind of 360-degree view on how we need to have multi-sectoral collaboration and allocation of budgets appropriately to scale up to a food systems transformation agenda. And I think finally, a food systems approach, as I said earlier, rightly highlights the array of complexities and dynamism and interconnections. But at the end of the day, we cannot optimize all of the outcomes that we think are really important. At the end of the day, policymakers do have to make trade-offs. They do have to prioritize what they think is most important. So they need to think about trade-offs across goals. And I talk frequently about this example in South Africa, where you had consumer groups and Ministry of Health come together to push forward on a sugar-sweetened beverage tax. And a lot of people saying that sugary drinks were really contributing to non-communicable diseases and particularly affecting women. And then this was passed successfully, but at the same time, you saw counter protests from the sugar industry itself, saying such measures are going to hurt sugar jobs, which you really see a large number of marginalized communities participating in this industry, and again, quite a lot of women in this industry. And so the Ministry of Trade and Industry has been trying to work to create a sugar master plan to help protect jobs in the sector. So it shows kind of the trade-offs across goals. We also have trade-offs over time. And I think a good example of this comes from discussions we've heard over the past few years about the need to repurpose agricultural subsidies. We know agricultural subsidies, scale up to billions and billions of dollars. They seem to be, a great target for reallocating money for more productive investments. And what's typically argued is that they should be reinvested in agricultural research and development, finding new technologies to scale up for better green transitions, for instance. So the diagram here comes from, different types of economic modeling work done by the World Bank, IFPRI, also the FAO and OECD have helped with this work. And it's basically showing, if you repurpose subsidies for ag R&D, you have win-win, outcomes in a number of areas in terms of diets, in terms of climate change, in terms of incomes for the poor. But repurposing subsidies is a temporal decision. If you rescind something today, you have to have citizen trust that it's going to be properly invested and have the necessary returns, 5, 10, 15 years from now. And so it really requires governments to decide, are we going to take that leap of faith and choose to reallocate our money in a way when there is a lot of uncertainty about whether it's going to have the desired outcomes that these models suggest they might have. And then finally, we have trade-offs between process and outcomes. I was talking earlier about the need to be thinking about citizen buy-in and legitimacy into the food systems vision. But of course, if you want to optimize a large set of goals, you're going to have a large set of stakeholders who need to be on board, and therefore getting reform off the ground is going to be much slower. And so that really requires, a trade-off between, are we going to try to do something as fast as we can, even if we don't have full citizen buy-in, or are we going to try to go slower, but make sure we have a more consultative approach and make sure that we get buy-in along the way. And we've seen the pros and cons of this recently. We've had a lot of confrontational efforts to do reforms where farmers felt that they were not consulted. By contrast, an example that's often cited is Ireland's consultative assemblies, where they try to get a variety of actors on board, have a very deliberative approach to food systems reform, but it's very time consuming. And it's taking many, many years to kind of get actors on board with the food system they want to move to. So let me conclude with what this means for the CGIAR. And I think it's even more complex because the CGIAR is not just about food systems, about agri-food systems. So also thinking about non-food crops like cotton. And we're also talking about land and water systems, which have their own different complexities and interconnections. Within the CGIAR, for those of you who don't know, there's been a big reform over the past few years, an attempt to move towards more than 30 different types of research initiatives that span across the different institutes within the CG system. But I think we're really kind of lacking a unified theory of change about how food systems transformation occurs and the piece of the puzzle that each of these types of initiatives are trying to inform. We still see these initiatives are still quite siloed into different technical, regional, or methodological areas of competence. You can see that from the names of some of these initiatives. And what we really need is some type of coherence assessment across the different policy recommendations that are coming out of the individual initiatives and seeing how they complement each other or how they don't complement each other vis-a-vis the 5 main impact areas that the CGIAR prioritizes, which include gender equality, poverty reduction, biodiversity, climate change, and I think job creation. And I think, though, at the same time, we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to enhance coherence, but we have an opportunity to look across our more than 30 initiatives and seeing what can we learn about the public sector institutional models, sociopolitical factors, and different participatory approaches that have the most promise for advancing innovation, uptake, and scaling. And I think the CGIAR, lastly, can really play a pivotal role in the global governance domain of food systems, really looking at the range of broader commitments that have been made by, by the COP28, by the G20, by BRICS, by the G8, et cetera, in terms of advancing food systems transformation, looking at where are the complementarities in all of these stated commitments, and has there actually been substantial action in these domains over time? So let me stop there and turn back over to you, Leonard.
Yeah, exactly on time. Thank you so much, Danielle, and thanks for the great presentation. So we now have about, well, almost 15 minutes for the discussion. And let me kick it off because I saw a great question by Peter. And it lines a little bit with what I intended to ask Cees already. Cees, if we take food systems transformation seriously, what are the implications for scaling a very popular concept within our work?
Yes, so I think, well, the idea of scaling has often been limited. You have one thing, a technology or something that you want to go to scale, right? And I think both you and me have been working on, we need to think about scaling in terms of configurations, right? So it's different things, social, technical elements. So you need different changes at the same time. So you need to think about scaling in a systems way, actually. So, and I think both what you developed, the scaling scan, and where I was involved in scaling readiness and also gender responsible scaling. They're actually attempts to make the thinking about scaling a bit more systemic. Also, I think this idea of, that systems don't change in an engineering way, so that you need to create a diversity of options in a system. So it's a bit of a Darwinistic process. You have an existing system, you have different options for the future, and you don't know which of those options is going to make it actually, right? So you need to create diversity in order to have sufficient options for one or two to become successful in a kind of configuration.
Thanks, Cees. A question, maybe both of you, but maybe Danielle, you can start. This is a question by Johannes. Analytical models, and you both showed a lot of different graphs and models of what a food system is. They can be either very complex or very reductive, and not helpful to inform investment or policy actions. How do you deal with this problem in supporting practitioners and policymakers? Maybe Danielle, you want to go first?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I have a fully satisfactory answer. But I think starting first with who are your counterparts, is really key. I think we sometimes think about the complexity from a researcher's perspective, and we don't want to leave anything out. And I've been in many exercises where you do these diagrams and then you think you're finished and someone says, oh, you forgot about water and sanitation, you forgot about gender equality, et cetera. But I think starting from the opposite perspective, if you're trying to influence policy change, who are those policy actors that you want to engage with, and kind of where is their entry point to the system? Because I think that also better helps you kind of frame what you're trying to communicate to them. And it also, gives you a sense of, how they're viewing it and how, the potential to bring in types of other policy practitioners into the system. Because as I mentioned, we're typically kind of only engaging maybe with our ministries of agriculture. But if we can kind of be thinking about who else do we need to convince that this is an important agenda, I think that helps, rather than just starting with our researcher perspective and saying everything's complex and we need to take everything into account.
Thanks. Cees, any additions to that?
Well, it's a little bit along similar lines. In the paper that we wrote, we say, there's a difference between food systems analysis, and a lot of these very nice are about analyzing the food system, right? But building a food system, synthesizing a food system, it's very different activity. It's about bringing stakeholders together. It's about having a vision. It's about having a coalition. So there's a very big difference between analyzing and researching a food system and in building a new food system. And for practitioners, I think, the key, and that's where everybody is struggling with, you cannot, you would like to intervene in 100 different places at the same time, but that's also impossible. So you need to find the leverages, right? So you need a plausible analysis or diagnosis of the system. What are the key bottlenecks that drive the system in a particular direction, and how can we change those bottlenecks and incentives? So that is, I think, looking for leverages is a key for practitioners to think about.
Thanks. Another great question, and I think for you, Danielle, and maybe Lou, you also want to jump in there if you want. Huh? So given the governance challenges for food systems, for example, no food systems ministry, how does research on food systems governance work across these existing governmental organizations under a food systems perspective? I think this is a very big reality for our work in the CGIAR. And what are some of the trade-offs working with different organizations and ministries? Danielle, thanks. Yeah,
well, let me take the second part first. I mean, I think The trade-offs are obviously, if you're going to work with just one sectoral ministry, they're going to have their own narrower perspective. But they may have the better kind of networks and deep knowledge of the issues. We've done some analysis of kind of what's the trade-offs with just working with Ministry of Agriculture versus working with planning and finance. And so the flip side of that is the planning and finance, as I was alluding to, they have a better kind of broad 360-degree view, as I like to say, of what's going on with different sectors. At the end of the day, you need money to obviously do a lot of these actions. So having the ministries of finance on board and convincing them this is an important agenda is paramount. But they don't have the deep knowledge of the sector that your Ministry of Ag or maybe your Ministry of Environment or Health may have. So at the end of the day, you want to be trying to engage all of these actors. But I think what I was alluding to is that there is scope within the CGIAR and with our other partners to be looking at what type of public sector institutional models may better facilitate some of this coordination. Is it about a presidential delivery unit? Some countries have started to adopt those types of systems. Is it about having a transformation agency, that brings together different ministries? So it's really a public sector governance issue that needs a lot more attention because there are ministerial jealousies. A food systems agenda, ministries are going to lose certain influence, they're going to lose certain budgets. And so I think we need to treat that as a kind of governance question in and of itself to progress on this agenda.
Lou, if you want, you can come in because you've been doing a lot of this research also within different ministries. Do you want to share some thoughts?
Certainly. So I think half of the research is really needs to focus on where are the successful models and where are what are the factors that predispose countries to actually making progress on interministerial coordination. So I think it's an interesting area of investigation, and it's an area where we can actually use research to provide guidance for countries who are looking to overcome some of the obstacles. We all know, even in our own, even in the most developed countries, interministerial coordination and cooperation is not a given. There are rivalries and competition, and there are good examples of collaboration as well. So I think being able to put forward models and provide guidance for just what conditions need to be met or what conditions are lead to positive outcomes. How can we smooth the road, as it were, with policy frameworks and coordination mechanisms? I think is a very important area for the research to be focusing.
Great, thanks. I have another interesting question here, and maybe Kees, you want to go for that one. So food system is complex, right? It's complex, but what are potential entry points to food system transformation in low and middle income countries? So I think the person asking this is suggesting there's a difference between maybe high income and low income. Is there a difference? You're muted, Kees.
Yeah, I find that hard. I'm sure there are differences, but I find it hard to pinpoint. One thing that I would think, and that also kind of links to the previous discussion that works, this issue of pressure, I think, is really important, right? Systems will not change without pressure. So somebody needs to put governments or actors under pressure in the sense that they realize that the current system is no longer acceptable to society. So it's not just governments, it's advocacy groups, international movements, collective action, and I would think that probably works in both settings, but perhaps in different ways. But that's also what the CG should be thinking about. Governments are often part of the problem rather than, of course, they're also part of the solution, but they do not necessarily like to transform the system that they're in.
Leonard, if I could just
Yeah, go
add
ahead,
to that.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was just trying to think about, as Kath said, I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities, whether we're talking about LMICs or high-income countries. But I think one of the main challenges is obviously financing, I think, for LMICs. And I think that is really where we need to prioritize thinking about sustainable financing. We have a huge debt distress and debt default situation happening in the global south. And that's going to forestall any efforts at food systems transformation. So I think about, what works in terms of sustainable finance, what's the range of different actors beyond the usual IFIs that we need to crowd into this space, is a real priority. And also thinking about, again, coming back to systems of public sector governance that can, effectively manage large amounts of money in an effective way and not get into continuing spirals of debt distress. So that would be a major priority, I would say, for LMICs.
Right. I'm trying to combine a few questions into one. So if I start to mumble, then just bear with it. It's a question by Andreas saying, well, now we're dealing with all this complexity. No, we are saying food systems are complex. Case, you're saying food systems even have a behavior, right? And they don't. Sometimes it's 1 and 1 is 3, and sometimes 2 + 2 is also 3, right? So that's a bit more complex than an older message that we used to convey for, well, decades, right? The older message was stressed that agricultural productivity needs to increase, and then we're all kind of fine, right? So how do you propose to deal with this, with kind of replacing this very simple message? As long as agricultural productivity is good, things will go right, linear cause effect, into now what you're telling us now, right? Food systems are complex, they have a behavior, they may not respond in the way that we want, we cannot even control them. How do you sell this message to others? And I think a second part of the question, and maybe also for Lou and Danielle, how do we as the CGIAR or in the research community deal with this? What is our narrative? I hope I kind of made sense out of that. Cees, you want to?
Yeah, I'll try. So the food system, can only be changed by the people that are in the system, right? And there are many different people. It's not just farmers. It's the finance sector, and there's a whole network. And all these people, they need different messages, if you want, or they have different perspectives on it. And if you want, and they need to. And I don't think we should be sending them messages in the sense of, we think of all the knowledge and then we do, the linear model. So we create messages for these specific people and then we're sending it to them. It's much more effective to work with these people during the research, right? So it's to elicit what are the questions and uncertainties that these actors in the system are facing, right? So and how can we address those uncertainties and those questions? I think research is there to address the uncertainties that people face and the difficulties that they have in changing, and to support the negotiation process. Research is one of the most effective. If you have a conflict or tensions or trade-offs, then joint collaborative research is one of the most powerful things you can do, actually, because people develop common understandings and starting points and become able to maybe overcome some of their difficulties, because it's the people that have to do it. And so we need to change the way we do research, actually, I think.
Great point, Lou, and then Danielle, and then
yeah, just picking up on Cees's point about research as negotiation support. I think that's an important element here, and keep in mind, research can often validate viewpoints that can analyze trade-offs, but it can also validate the viewpoints of groups that are maybe not so well heard in some of the negotiation processes. And I think that's something that is important for international research, but also national research to by elucidating who has what viewpoint, who has what interests. If you think about change from a perspective of people working on material and non-material interests, having a big impact on what people are willing to do and what they're not willing to do, but also where they get their ideas from, where do they get their incentives from. I think that helps us understand just how to go about facilitating change and providing guidance to governments that want to change the incentive structures for the current status quo to something that they consider more sustainable. So I think there's the viewpoint side of things, there's the trade-off side of things, and then the guidance for incentive structures that are likely to bring about the types of change.
Great. Danielle?
Yeah, I think those are both great points. I guess I'll just to close on your last question about what is our narrative within the CGIAR. And I think here, I think it's about maybe stressing the benefits of transformation a bit more clearly, because I think, a lot of different stakeholders still feel like they may be victims of particularly certain types of green transitions, for instance. So I think we need to do kind of a better job of highlighting the different benefits that different stakeholder groups are going to have if we think about, a transformed food system that ideally meets the different goals that we think are really key on environment, diets, livelihoods, and going beyond just, showing those benefits for farmers and consumers, informal traders, but also for the private sector, showing that they're not going to always lose out from some of these efforts in order to bring them on board. There's sometimes a kind of a demonization of certain actors in the private sector in some of these discourses, and that kind of precludes any type of productive discussions.
Yeah, great. I think there was even a question on that as well, the politics of it in the chat. But we have to conclude now. Thank you so much for your contributions, and thank you so much for also really for the participants. I think there's a really great discussion going on in the chat already. We can just sit and relax and watch the chat go by. I'm really happy now that we have some closing remarks from Kristin Davis. She's a senior research fellow at IFPRI and also work package lead for the Nature Plus initiative, Nature Positive Solutions. And Kristin, you provide some closing remarks, and then the webinar will be over. Thank you, Kristin, and thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Leonard, for the facilitation and those behind the scenes who are helping us with the questions. Yeah, there's not much time left, but as seen by the high interest in this webinar and the really dynamic discussion that has been going on, I think we all recognize that food systems are really crucially important for, as presented in the IFPRI book that Danielle spoke about, providing food, nutrition, and livelihoods to our population that's growing. And we've seen that these events and issues like conflicts and the climate crisis, food prices, et cetera, really highlight the need to transform systems, as expressed in the Schneider 2023 Nature Food article, to bring about this future where all people have access to healthy diets produced in sustainable and resilient ways that restore nature, but also deliver just and equitable livelihoods. There's so many highlights. I probably won't talk about many of them. I think there was really dynamic discussion, really interesting points brought up by the speakers about things like the winners and the losers, the many actors that we have to consider, the differences between countries when we're talking about food systems transformation and things like that. So the CGIAR research, the CGIAR engagement continues to work on these efforts to build knowledge about transformation around food systems. And as Leonard mentioned at the beginning, the initiatives on low-emission food systems, Mitigate Plus, and the Nature Positive Solutions, as well as the Scaling Community of Practice, came together in 2023 as we were grappling with our research and our outreach, and to say, we need to talk more about this. We need to engage the broader community in deeper discussion and learning. So we created this series of webinars so that people have more awareness on food systems transformation, so that we can collectively think about how we as researchers and also implementers can contribute to it, and also just to see what is the interest and scope for more attention to this. Today is the first of 3 webinars of 1 hour each, and we hope they will take place in the first 3 quarters of 2024. If you are interested to contribute and to suggest topics, please write in the chat now. Please reach out to one of us about topics that you're thinking should be important or should be coming next. We're thinking about, why is it so difficult to embrace food systems transformation? Maybe something on measurement of transformation of food systems, and also good examples in action. So as I said, we're still shaping up this program, so feel free to reach out and to contribute. I'd like to really thank Leonard, Wei, our communications team, Ryan, and everyone from the various centers and the initiatives who've really worked to get this excellent discussion off the ground. Thank you so much to our speakers for their excellent and their insightful presentations. And thanks so much to all of you for participating. And we really hope to see you next time. Thanks, and over and out.